A wealthy man once walked past a hungry child sitting outside a restaurant. The boy looked up at him and quietly asked, "Sir, could you please buy me something to eat?" The man looked at the boy for a moment, then kept walking. Years later, the same wealthy man would stand in front of that boy again. But this time, everything had changed. The wealthy man's name was Richard. He owned several businesses in the city. He wore expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and believed that success was proof that he was better than most people around him. One evening, Richard left an expensive restaurant after dinner. Outside the entrance sat a young boy named Daniel. Daniel was around 12 years old. His clothes were old, his shoes were worn, and he had not eaten since the previous morning. When Richard walked past, Daniel gathered enough courage to speak. "Sir, I am sorry to bother you. Could you please buy me some bread?" Richard stopped and looked at him. Then he glanced at the expensive watch on his wrist. "You should be working instead of begging," he said. Daniel lowered his eyes. "I am still in school, sir. My mother is sick." Richard shook his head. "Everyone has problems." And then he walked away. A few minutes later, a restaurant worker came outside. Her name was Anna. She had seen everything through the window. She sat beside Daniel and gently asked, "When did you last eat?" Daniel hesitated. "Yesterday." Anna went back inside the restaurant. A few minutes later, she returned with a warm meal and a bottle of water. Daniel looked at the food but did not touch it. "I don't have any money," he said. Anna smiled. "I didn't ask for any." Daniel slowly began to eat. After a few bites, he looked at her and asked, "Why are you helping me?" Anna answered, "Because today you need help. Maybe one day you will be able to help someone else." Daniel never forgot those words. Life was not easy for him. He continued going to school while taking small jobs after class. He studied late at night and worked whenever he could to help his mother. There were days when he felt exhausted. There were moments when he wanted to give up. But whenever life became difficult, Daniel remembered that evening outside the restaurant. He remembered being hungry. He remembered Richard walking away. But more importantly, he remembered Anna coming back with food. Years passed. Daniel graduated and slowly built a successful career. He was no longer the hungry boy sitting outside a restaurant. But unlike some people who forget where they came from, Daniel remembered exactly what it felt like to have nothing. Whenever he saw someone struggling, he tried to help when he could. Not because he expected anything in return, but because someone had once helped him when he needed it most. Meanwhile, Richard's life began to change. For years, he believed his success would last forever. But one bad investment became two. His company lost several important clients. Debts began to grow. Business partners who had once praised him slowly disappeared. People who used to call him every day stopped answering his calls. Within a few years, Richard lost almost everything. The expensive car was gone. The large office was gone. And many of the people he once called friends were gone too. One afternoon, Richard walked into an office looking for work. He needed a job. Any job. He sat quietly in the waiting room, holding his resume in his hands. For the first time in many years, Richard was nervous about whether someone would give him a chance. Then the office door opened. A man stepped outside. "Mr. Richard." Richard stood and followed him into the room. Behind the desk sat Daniel, the hungry boy from outside the restaurant. Richard did not recognize him, but Daniel recognized Richard immediately. For a few seconds, Daniel said nothing. He simply looked at the man who had once walked past him when he was hungry. Then Daniel asked, "Do you remember a young boy outside a restaurant many years ago?" Richard looked confused at first. Then slowly his expression changed. He remembered. The old clothes. The worn shoes. The boy asking for bread. Richard looked down. That was you. Daniel nodded. Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, I am sorry. I was a different person then. Daniel had every reason to be angry. He could have humiliated Richard. He could have reminded him of every cruel word he had spoken. He could have told him to leave. But Daniel remembered Anna. He remembered the woman who had given him food without asking for anything in return. He remembered her words. Maybe one day you will be able to help someone else. Daniel looked at Richard and said, I can change what happened that day. But someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. And I decided a long time ago that I would pass that kindness on. Daniel gave Richard an opportunity to work. Not because Richard's behavior years earlier deserved to be rewarded, but because Daniel refused to let another person's cruelty decide what kind of man he would become. Years earlier, Richard had money but very little compassion. Daniel had almost nothing, but one small act of kindness helped shape the rest of his life. And perhaps that is one of the most important lessons life teaches us. The person you ignore today may become someone very different tomorrow. The person you look down on may one day stand in a place you never expected. Money changes. Status changes. Success can disappear. But the way we make people feel can remain in their memory for years. There is also another lesson in Daniel's story. Karma is not always about watching someone suffer for the mistakes they made. Sometimes karma gives us the opportunity to choose who we want to become. Daniel could have chosen revenge. Instead, he chose kindness. Not because he forgot what happened, but because he had learned something more powerful than anger. He had learned that one small act of kindness can continue through many lives. Anna helped Daniel. Daniel later helped others. And years later, even Richard received a second chance because of the kindness Anna had shown a hungry child long before. So if you can help someone today, do it within your ability. Maybe it is a meal. Maybe it is a kind word. Maybe it is simply listening to someone who feels alone. You may never know how far that small act will travel, and you may never see it return to you. But that is not why kindness matters. Kindness matters because sometimes one good action gives another person enough hope to keep moving forward. And perhaps the greatest form of karma is not revenge. Perhaps it is this. Someone once gave you kindness when you needed it. And when your turn comes, you choose to pass it on. If this story gave you something to think about, remember this. Never let someone else's cruelty decide what kind of person you become. Be kind when you can, because one small act of kindness may continue traveling through the world long after you have forgotten it. This is Karma Stew. Stories about karma, kindness, family, and the lessons life teaches us. If you enjoyed this story, stay with us for the next one.